I figured it out. I know what Rings of Power is. It's a shaggy dog story. If you're not familiar with what that is, a shaggy dog story is an anecdotal tale told for comedic effect. It features an excessive amount of narration and a lot of details, most of which are irrelevant. But still, the story drags on until it reaches an inevitable, anticlimactic ending, which makes the whole thing feel like a waste of time. The late comic Norm Macdonald was a master at telling shaggy dog stories.
I started to do stand-up and travel from here to there and to here again. One time I was in Niagara Falls, and gosh, I went over to the SeaWorld there. You know how they have the SeaWorld?
I didn't know that, but okay, yes.
Beluga.
The SeaWorld, I've been
Sure.
there many a time.
Okay, so I was checking out the beluga whales and stuff, and I look over, and who do you think I see? It was just an attendant, but...
When told well, their sheer banality can be entertaining. When told badly, you get Rings of Power. Before I get into the play-by-play of Episode 6, Where Is He?, I need to take a moment to discuss something. We spend a fair amount of time in Numenor, and the developments that are happening there, but the writers are barreling ahead building a major conflict without the appropriate context. So since Rings of Power refuses to give you the information you need to understand their story, I'm going to do my best to fill in the gaps. This season they've been laying a lot of groundwork to show Numenor breaking into two groups, a progressive side led by Pharazôn and those like him. They claim to be looking forward to Numenor's future. They are interested in parting ways with their history and traditions concerning the Elves and the Valar. The other side is a conservative group known as the Faithful. They've been mentioned a couple of times in Rings of Power, but without explaining who they are. In J.R.R. Tolkien's Legendarium, the island of Numenor was originally called Elna. It was raised out of the sea by the Valar, and given as a home to the Duodain, a mighty race of men who were known for their strength and longevity. The Duodain on Elna later renamed the island Numenor, and became the Númenóreans. The Faithful are the people who remember this and remain faithful to it and the Valar, their traditions, legacy, and worship handed down to them over hundreds of years. What we have in Rings of Power is a split between these two sides. The show is accelerating a division that took place over something like 1,000 years, and is compressing it into a span of weeks and months, all of it leading to a civil war in which Pharazôn and his king's men will expel the Faithful to Middle-earth. This is how we get Elendil and Isildur becoming kings in Arnor and Gondor, and eventually leading the kingdoms of men in the War of Last Alliance against Sauron, while Pharazôn leads Numenor to ruin and destruction. Got all that? Well then with this new context, let's see what Rings of Power does with the story. We actually start off with Arondir running through the forest. He comes across a small group of orcs who are apparently deserting Adar's army. I don't have a big problem with the idea that Adar doesn't have full control over the orcs, but one of the deserting orcs comments, "I don't really care what they call us. Anything's better than freezing while helping Adar chase a ghost."
Anything's better than dying out Adar chase a ghost.
The ghost being Sauron, who they still believe is dead. But this is a problem, because the show has been telling us that Sauron is gathering strength, awakening and attracting evil from across Middle-earth. The Barrow-wights and the Balrog are two examples of this. If that is the case, then the orcs should be sensitive to Sauron's growing influence as well. How can they remain so ignorant so close to his presence?
This ain't right. All the pieces ain't welding together true.
One thing that I can say is that Rings of Power is consistently inconsistent. Arondir kills the orcs and decides to check their bodies. Lucky for him, the first one he checks has a scrap of paper on them with a rendering of Eregion. Why would a random orc have this? So that Arondir can find it and learn where to go. I told you, the show would have random BS so its characters all wind up in the same place. And you know what that means. A bunch of forced BS is being laid out so that all of our characters will wind up in the same place again. But this is the only time we see Arondir in this episode, and we have no idea where Isildur, Theo, Estrid, or the Wildmen are. We jump to Eregion, where Celebrimbor is frustrated. He says the rings for men are defying him, as every attempt to make them has failed. Does this show really want me to believe they've just forgotten how to forge rings? I don't know, and neither do the writers. Celebrimbor orders his workers to try again, but they run out of mithril. Celebrimbor loses his temper over this, and the elf girl says Celebrimbor hasn't seemed like himself lately. The Master Smith seems bewildered by this, and even forgets elf girl's name, though so did I. So she reminds us that her name is Mardania. Celebrimbor sends everyone out of the room, as Annatar Halbrand Sauron comes in. Celebrimbor admits to him that he's been forgetting things, losing them. He chalks it up to fatigue, but Annatar Halbrand Sauron tells him that his people are asking for an audience. It seems he's been neglecting his duties for the rest of the city to focus on his rings. The smith doesn't want to talk to anyone though. He's become obsessed with making the rings that he believes will bring him some kind of salvation. He asks Annatar Halbrand Sauron to take care of the mithril problem. And all of this, they're going out of their way to show Celebrimbor falling apart. So Annatar Halbrand Sauron assumes leadership duties in the city. Mardania and Agar tell him that the usual flow of visitors into Eregion has stopped. They sent guards to investigate, and only one returned. Well, he didn't really return. His body washed up on shore with a message carved into his chest. Wait, why did that not set off every alarm in the city? Why were they just waiting around to tell someone this? I don't know, but Annatar Hellbrand Sauron tells the guards to bury the body and tell no one. He also lies to Mordania that Celebrimbor doesn't want help from the elf workers anymore. He wants to work alone. Obviously, Annatar is isolating Celebrimbor, pushing him further into madness, which I question considering he's still relying on him to make the rings. Making the smith more unstable seems counterproductive, but that's just me. Anyway, Mordania wants to know what the message carved into the dead guard meant, as it was in a language she doesn't know. Annatar Hellbrand Sauron tells her it meant, "Where is he?" Hey, that's the name of the episode. In Adar's camp, Galadriel is sitting at a table with him. Adar says that Galadriel's obsession with finding Sauron was how he captured her. Galadriel tries to refute this by telling Adar that he submitted to Sauron, while she resisted, which isn't true. Adar rebelled and murdered Sauron. Galadriel helped him right into the heart of power, so she continues to be delusional. They talk about how Sauron corrupts people by granting them what they want. Adar says Sauron's lies are not what need to be extinguished, but Sauron himself, and he wants to help Galadriel with that. Galadriel wants to know what help he could possibly be, and I can't help but think, well, he's got an army. That could be helpful. Adar says he knows that Sauron is hiding in Eregion, but how does he know this? Well, apparently Adar knew Halbrand was Sauron.
Halbrand is Sauron, isn't he?
That's why he had one of his orcs follow him to Eregion. But if he knew this, why didn't he just kill Sauron instead of letting him go? Well, he says that the crown that he stabbed Sauron with was forged using some of the Silmarils from Valinor. And no, that doesn't remotely make any kind of sense. But it does explain why Adar stabbed Sauron with it, hoping that it might have the power to kill him. And now he thinks the crown and Galadriel's ring together might be able to do so. That still doesn't explain why Adar let him go. He could have kept Sauron locked up until he found a way to get his hands on one of the elven rings. Though we don't know when he learned about those either, and never mind, I can't make this make sense. Adar tells Galadriel that the fate of Eregion rests on her ability to set aside her pride. In Numenor, Elendil is on trial for inciting an uprising that caused loss of life. The only loss of life was Curly, who the Dork Kid Kinman stabbed through the back while unarmed. What is this, the January 6th committee? Anyway, Elendil is being charged with treason. Pharazôn says the charges warrant death, but because of his years of loyal service, he should be granted a reprieve, if he swears fealty to the rightful ruler, which Elendil does, only he doesn't recognize Pharazôn as the rightful ruler. He remains loyal to Miriel.
For Numenor's true ruler is now, and to the end of her days, Miriel!
He's led out of the hall, and someone suggests that the faithful be tried by the old ways to determine their fate. Back with the stranger, who is having visions of Nori screaming or being harmed or tortured or something, Not Tom continues to speak in riddles about the forces in the world that can teach people if they listen. He implies that these forces cannot be mastered, but they can be used. The stranger wants to know how, and Not Tom says he will show him, but not yet because we cut back to Nori and the stores, and I don't know what to say about this. It is mostly a bunch of wheel-spinning nonsense. Nori talks to the store's leader about moving because their village is no longer safe. She says that the Harfoots moved all the time, but the store's leader says that the village is more than just the place that they live. It is their home. Again, planting the idea of a home in Nori's head. We jump to Nori and Poppy talking. Poppy thinks that the people after them are only after them because they're after the stranger, and that if they find him, everyone could be in danger. No explanation on why they think that, but they decide to stay and fight. Fight who? The masked hunters apparently just left. They didn't take the stores prisoner, they didn't search the village, they didn't leave anyone behind to guard them. They just made some stern threats and then GTFO'd. But I guess they're coming back, and our little Harfoots think that they can fight to these guys.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
Anyway, Not Tom and the stranger are walking along. It's time for the stranger to find his staff. How? Well, Not Tom leads the stranger to a valley of dead brush and says he will find his true staff when, and I'm not making this up, when the vision of his heart is single with the service of the secret fire. Now, Not Tom hasn't explained who or what the secret fire is, how the stranger is supposed to sync his heart up to it, or anything that could remotely be helpful. Of course, if you've read the books or watched the movies, you've heard this reference before.
I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Arnor.
Which in turn is a reference to the creator being and his power of creation. It can also be read as the essence or life force that gives all sentient life its free will. But here, Not Tom is throwing it around as little more than a bad rendition of the force, and it doesn't really work. It doesn't make sense to the stranger either. He's feeling pressed for time because he believes the vision he had, Nori and Poppy, are in danger, that they may be killed. And this leads to possibly the most egregious misappropriation of Tolkien yet. Not Tom feeds the stranger a line.
Many that die deserve life. Some that live deserve death.
Which is what Gandalf tells Frodo in Fellowship of the Ring. This is out of place, forced, and removes what little doubt I may have had about the stranger's true identity. So since this is delivered by Not Tom, the stranger will henceforth be called Pseudo Gandalf. The scene gets worse from here. Not Tom tells Pseudo Gandalf that his path has split into two, that if he leaves to save Nori and Poppy, he can never return to this path, the path of becoming a wizard to stand against Sauron in the Dark Wiz. And there's something awful familiar about all this.
Something very familiar about all this.
Yeah, Rings of Power is taking from its betters again, this time from Empire Strikes Back, when Luke has a vision of Han, Chewbacca, and Leia in trouble. Yoda warns Luke that if he abandons his train to go help them, he won't be able to return.
You must not go. Only a fully trained Jedi Knight, with the Force as his ally, will conquer Vader and his Emperor.
Not Tom tells Pseudo Gandalf that he must choose between saving his friends and his destiny.
Your friend or your destiny.
And then he disappears and leaves them alone. In Khazad-dûm, the dwarves are mining mountains of gold. Prince Durin walks into the throne room and asks why his father has summoned him, but the king didn't. Annatar Halbrand Sauron did, who is now in Khazad-dûm, somehow. Annatar Halbrand Sauron tells the Durins that Eregion is under threat of attack, and that the elves need more mithril to complete the remaining rings. Though you wonder why the dwarves would care about the elves making more rings. Good question. They wouldn't. But the king has become so consumed by his newfound greed for more gold that Annatar Halbrand Sauron thinks he has a bargaining chip.
I understand you are expanding your mining operations. We can provide a steady supply of timber to help build platforms, mine shafts.
But it doesn't work. King Durin says no. Then Annatar Halbrand Sauron sees a vision of the Balrog rising from one of the torches in the throne room. He pretends to acquiesce and leaves. The king tells his son he's only holding out. If war is coming to the surface, he wagers the elves will become more desperate for mithril, and the dwarves will be able to name any price they want for it. This leads Prince Durin to conclude the ring has had too much influence over his father.
Father, take off the ring.
Which he won't. Prince Durin tries to grab his father's hand, but the ring knocks Durin back several feet, something it can now do apparently. Then we're with Disa and Durin talking about what to do next. Disa wants to defy the king, but Prince Durin is struggling standing up to his father. In Numenor, Elendil's daughter visits the dungeon to make a final plea to her father. There are guys blowing horns to summon something called a sea worm. Elendil will then be thrown into the sea to face the trial by Abyss. So if he is deemed innocent, the sea worm won't eat him. But if he is found guilty, then it will, I guess. The daughter says Elendil can still save himself by swearing allegiance to Pharazôn, but Elendil won't compromise his integrity. His daughter breaks down and says after everything she's lost, she doesn't want to lose him too. Maybe she should have thought of that before she betrayed him by throwing him with Pharazôn. But she's still a manipulative snake. See, she's gotten permission to go to Miriel. The former Kryn Regent comes into the dungeon and orders Elendil to serve Pharazôn. She still believes that the island is better off with him, but Elendil doesn't, and he's sticking to his belief. And he repeats a line we haven't heard in quite some time. The sea is always right, and so he entrusts his fate to it. In Khazad-dûm, a group of miners are headed to work, but Disa is blocking their path. They threaten to remove her by force, and she starts stone singing. And bats descend on them. Apparently her stone singing can summon bats now, and the group of strong, experienced dwarves are scared away by a few bats. Leaving aside how stupid that is, apparently the Rings of Power writers understand mining about as well as they understand smithing. Typically mines will have more than one shaft, so if Disa is blocking one, they could let her and just mine in a different place, or they could dig around her, so this shouldn't work. But we're back in Numenor, and it's time for Elendil to face judgment. However, before he can be cast into the sea, Miriel pops up. She says because Elendil was acting in her name, which he wasn't, but whatever, since he acted in her name, she can take his sentence for him. Elendil doesn't like it, but Miriel tells him that if they are to walk the path of the faithful, she must be the one to take the first step, and I don't think this makes much sense. I think mostly Miriel is having a crisis of faith. This is her way of testing if Pharazôn is the rightful ruler, or if the Valar are with her. So Miriel goes down into the water. A tentacle pulls her under so we can see how much budget they spent on a big CG monster thing. Above, Pharazôn is just about to declare her dead and guilty, when a surge of water spits Miriel back on land. Elendil declares her Queen of the Sea, a chant that is picked up by others. And as I mentioned before, this is all to speed up the Civil War storyline that will divide Numenor. After this, we see Pharazôn using the Palantir. But in the Seeing Stone, we catch glimpses of fire, Mount Doom, and Halbrand Sauron. So yeah, just as we knew, he's being corrupted. Or more corrupted. In Adar's camp, Galadriel has decided to work with the orcs. She confirms Halbrand is Sauron, that he is in Eregion, crafting rings to dominate all of Middle-earth. Galadriel says Sauron won't escape until his job is done, only Sauron isn't making the rings, Celebrimbor is. And Sauron did leave Eregion to go to Khazad-dûm, but again, I can't make this make sense. The writers are just inept. Galadriel thinks Sauron being tied to Eregion gives them an advantage, though she doesn't say what that is. She says that Elrond is coming with the elf army and bringing her ring with him.
As we speak, Elrond hastens from Lindon with an army of elves. And Nenya, my ring.
Though I don't know why she would believe that. Elrond has been against the rings, and her wearing one.
In choosing to wear those rings, You have all chosen to become his collaborators.
He took it from her to get it away from the orcs and Adar, so there's no reason he would bring it back to them, right?
You didn't, did you? You didn't bring it, did you? Well,
Anyway, Adar wonders what will happen after they defeat Sauron, what the elves will do to him and his orcs. But of course he knows the answer, and Galadriel just told him that her people are coming, and bringing with them the one thing he wants. And she doesn't even realize what she's done until after Adar calls her out on it.
Hoping I will reveal something.
You have already revealed everything I hoped you would.
Galadriel really is the worst character I've ever seen in fiction. Okay, so realizing all this, Galadriel has a moment of insight. She rightfully calls out that Sauron has no army of his own. She suggests that Sauron has lured Adar and his people there for his own purpose, to place the orc army between himself and the elves. She says that Adar is playing right into Sauron's hands, which means so is she. Again, the orcs start moving. The guards in Eregion sound them warning, and Annatar Helbrand Sauron is back in the city, and we see him cutting himself. Celebrimbor is still in his workshop, working on his designs for the Nine Rings. The alarms rile him from his stupor. Annatar Helbrand Sauron tries to calm him down, but fails. He wants the smith to continue working on the rings, forgetting that they can't because they don't have Mithril. Celebrimbor heads outside to check on the city, but Sauron causes him to see a vision that everything is fine. Annatar Helbrand Sauron claims that he's tried to forge the rings before and failed. He says he needs Celebrimbor to forge them for him.
I came to Eregion not because the Valar needed you, but because I did.
Which is yet another slight against the character and the lore, but I've lost count how many times they've done this. Anyway, Annatar Helbrand Sauron has somehow smuggled highly refined, pure mithril powder out of Khazad-dûm. How did he do that? Don't know, but he talks Celebrimbor into finishing his work on the rings, promising it will be his greatest legacy. As the episode ends, the attack on Eregion begins. And that is episode 6. The problems are only multiplying as the season drags on, and we are headed into the final 2 episodes, which will presumably cover the forging of the Nine Rings and the fall of Eregion, and we'll see just how anticlimactic this Shaggy Dog story will be.
No! No! I knew that was gonna happen. You don't encourage that!
But as always, this is just one Rebel's opinion. What did you think of episode 6? Let me know in the comments. Like the video, and remember to hit that subscribe button so you'll always get the latest updates from Rebel Normal.